week before his wedding, he was out with his buddies at a bar in Detroit.
Inside the bar, 43-year-old Ronald Evans, a foreman at a Chrysler auto plant, and his 23-year-old stepson, Michael Nitz, taunted Chin, mistaking him for Japanese and accusing him for the economic downfall of the U.S. auto industry.
The fight ends up outside, where the assailants hunt down Chin and his friends.
According to witnesses, Evans took this bat out of the trunk of his car and repeatedly used it to hammer and crush Chin's skull.
As his friend held him, his last words were, "It isn't fair. It isn't fair."
Vincent's killers plead guilty to manslaughter and face 15 years in prison. But Judge Charles Kaufman sentences them to 3 years probation and a $3,000 fine. He says, these aren't the kind of men you send to prison.
I think the Vincent Chin murder was shocking to a lot of Asian Americans, not because it represented something new, but that it actually represented something old. It reminded Asian Americans that progress hadn't really been made.
In 1882, you could kill a, quote, Chinaman and get off paying $1. In 1982, you can kill an Asian American and get off paying $3,000. This was not justice, but there wasn't an organization that existed to stand up and say, this is wrong. What began out of that was meetings that started with 4 people, 10 people, 20 people, 100 people. And people were talking about, what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? I raised my hand and I said, the world wants to know how the Asian American community feels about this.
In depth, Vincent Chin inspired protest marches, rallies, dinners, banquets.
The killing of Vincent Chin is probably the most tragic example of the kind of violence that's being committed against Asians.
For Asian Americans, Vincent Chin's murder symbolized an extreme example of the kind of discrimination that they'd face.
Well, back in the 80s, the Detroit community was quite small. I believe the census showed we had about 35,000 people in the southeast Michigan area, which is microscopic if you think about it, an area which has almost 4 million people living. Add to it, we were in the middle of a crisis with the auto industry, deep recession.
Industries pulling up stakes faster than you could say single business tax.
I've had enough of 82. It has to get better.
And so it must be. For Detroit, 1982 was the year the recession became depression by proclamation of Mayor Young.
Now, back then it was called Japan bashing, but quite frankly, if you're Asian in appearance, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Vietnamese. We're all the same.
But many of their verbal bullets aimed at the Japanese government and car makers have strayed off course and are hitting home instead.
I've been followed down the road by hostile people screaming out the window of their car, brandishing weapons in the window and everything else, and I've come very close on several occasions to having a serious confrontation where someone probably would have got hurt.
We got Japs, Chinese, any goddamn guy in the world working out on our line, and it don't bother us one bit. And if they had all the Japanese cars, this is not a prejudice situation.
Which in some ways is very scary because even though as bad as it was back in 1982, 83, it's even worse now. We didn't have this large proliferation of attacks back then. It was more isolated, but now it's become a national epidemic. When I see the video, the kind of outrage, I think fervor that it raised in the Asian American community, not just locally, but nationally, it's deja vu all over again. We're seeing the same kind of dynamic now in 2021. And for me, it's very disturbing because I thought after 40 years, things would have changed, but again, it's the same, if not worse. And as I've told many people before, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better with the current political environment.